She is correct. The sentence cracks across the summit court before the bell finishes its third strike. Sound hangs under iron trusses and blue slate, and nobody moves. No clerk, no guard, no petitioner with folded hands, because the High King has just overturned his own ruling from the same cedar dais, in front of every witness in this first thaw session. Griffin Frostborn still has her right hand braced against the petitioner rail she climbed, knuckles white around carved wood, two wax-sealed survey tubes under her left arm. One seal is cracked where she tore it with her teeth. Meltwater drips from her hem in a dark half-circle. Beside her calf, her one-eyed hound, Sable, tracks the king, left hind leg trembling from the climb. Oren Vale's polished smile slides off his face. Ivar Thorn rises from the chair of black oak and ash, palms flat on the table where he had just stamped Oren's border map valid under crown measure. His signet leaves a wet crescent in spilled ink. He does not reach for his sword or call guards. He looks at Griffin and repeats, lower, as if speaking to the line she drew in air with her finger. She is correct. Suspend the ruling. Bring the third ledger. The bell rope burns through Tamsin Reed's hand as she yanks once to mark reversal in session. Her voice lands clean. Codicil 7, third ledger, page 41. An issued summit ruling may be revised before adjournment if new sworn measure is presented in open hearing before no fewer than 12 witnesses and 2 officers of seal. We have 19 witnesses, 2 officers, and the measure is present. The room exhales. Griffin tastes copper where she bit her tongue and does not let go of the rail. 3 years earlier, she stood in this hall and learned what a verdict could do. In 1021, winter did not end so much as loosen. Wind came off north ridges with ice grit, and grain bins in lower terraces rang hollow. Griffin was 15, burning tallow stubs to read figures scratched in her mother's ledgers while frost feathered their shutters. Her mother never called it mathematics. She called it debt that wanted shape. Count boundary by hunger, she said, pushing a barley kernel along the margin. If a line shifts uphill, who loses first? Griffin answered without looking up. The low fields, then millers, then everyone with children. Good. Now count the lie. Lessons began with cairns and ended with throats. 12 paces between first 2 marker stones on the east shoulder, then 21 to split birch, then 38 to old avalanche scar. In snow, distances changed. In ledgers, changes could be dressed up. By deep frost, Griffin could calculate tithe shares faster than some factors. She learned to square rough plots from tree stumps and dry wells. She learned one missing notch in a tally stick could move 6 sacks of rye from one village to another. Boundaries were not lines on parchment. They decided who ate broth and who gnawed leather. When famine bit hardest, they boiled nettles and cracked beetroots with a hammer. Her mother still set ledgers out nightly, ink stiff in the cold. By first melt of 1022, Griffin was walking surveys for households who paid in onions or wood. She carried waxed cord knotted at fixed lengths, a scrap iron plumb bob, and a broken corner slate. She trusted what she could touch. Cord tension, cairn stone under thawed moss, river bends that ignored decrees. Tamsin entered those years like a bell in fog, heard before seen. She rang tower shifts when barely older than Griffin and remembered every face in a crowd. If 30 petitioners lined up, Tamsin could tell who limped right and who had a chipped front tooth. She also counted witnesses out loud when officials hoped no one would count. 4 from West Terraces, she murmured during market disputes. 2 from Upper Sheep Run, 1 from Rivermill, and he's lying by his left cheek. By 1024, Griffin had enough first-hand measure to know Eastern markers had begun to drift in official copies, not in stone on ridges, in ink in court books. She brought rolled surveys, wax-sealed and countersigned by 2 local officers, to Summit Court and requested correction before spring tithes were fixed. She expected argument. She got dismissal. The 1024 court year smelled of oiled leather and hot pitch from roof repairs. Griffin stood below the dais in a borrowed coat with one short cuff, survey tubes in her elbow crook. Ivar sat high-backed beneath carved crest, younger than the title sounded and harder than rumor painted him. He listened while Oren presented crown map copy with smooth turns of parchment. Oren spoke with polished restraint. These revisions reflect erosion and natural shift over 2 winters. We cannot tax empty air. Griffin asked leave to answer and was told to wait. She waited through 3 lesser petitions. When called, she unrolled her map to show cairn coordinates taken on foot and marked the difference. 18 miles. The official line cuts 18 miles downslope from fixed stones that have not moved. That transfers acreage from 5 villages to Oren's bonded lots. A clerk coughed. Oren smiled at the cough. Ivar asked for her seal authority. Griffin held up tube end, wax impressed with local mark. I measured those lines at snowmelt and after harvest. That would be 1023 measure, Oren said. Informal. First pass 1023. Confirmed 1024 with 2 officers. She looked to the dais and found Ivar's full attention at last. It was weighing, not kind. The Crown Steward whispered in his ear. Ivar's jaw shifted. Petitioner Griffin Frostborn, you were previously called under Crown's claim oath to service pending border review and did not complete that service. Her stomach dropped. I was called to transcribe from copies already corrupted. The oath remains enforceable. He signaled for the writ. A guard brought a folded document bound with cord and tin seal. Ivar broke it and read from the same page he had signed. By Crown claim over contested bounds, any skilled measurer within Summit jurisdiction may be compelled to serve no less than 7 years in survey, ledger, and mark maintenance where civil need is declared. 7 years. Griffin felt heat in her face and cold in her hands. She knew people who vanished into remote assignments under this oath and returned bent, coughing, or not at all. Coerced service was legal because law named it necessity. I petition correction of a false line, she said, throat raw. You answer with compulsion? I answer with Crown authority, Ivar said, something tightening in his expression. Your measure may be submitted in ordinary review after term begins. After 7 years, the villages will be stripped. Proceedings are closed on this point. Tamsin stood at side benches, bell rope coiled at her feet, and went very still. Griffin did not shout then. She rolled her surveys with careful fingers and walked out past 3 guards pretending not to stare. Outside, snowmelt ran in dirty channels. Sable, then younger, with 2 clear eyes and no limp, fell in beside her without being called. For months after 1024, resentment lived in Griffin like an embedded splinter. She served under oath because refusal meant prison and survey crews still needed someone who could detect tampered markers. She rode ridge lines where wind peeled skin from lips. She logged disputed tracks while officials argued in warm rooms. She learned where Oren's carts ran at night and which warehouse lanterns burned past curfew. Ivar's signature stayed at the bottom of the writ in her memory. In 1025 snowmelt, she took her chance. Snow released East Shoulder in jagged patches that year. Griffin went out with 2 officers of seal and 1 mule carrying stakes, chain, and plaster for marker impressions. Air smelled of wet stone and thaw rot. She measured every cairn line herself, boots sinking ankle deep, hands numb around chain links. Read, she said at each station, 12 rods and 6 links. Again. He read again. She recorded, then scraped lichen from marker faces to reveal old chisel cuts matching older ledgers. At cairn 9, fresh mortar where none should be. At cairn 11, a top stone rotated so carved notch pointed downslope instead of east. Deliberate, Griffin said, not frost heave. The senior officer pressed his seal into wax beside her notation. The full circuit took 9 days. On day 6, sleet sliced sideways and they sheltered under an overhang with Sable pressed against Griffin's knees. That was when he took the cut that later clouded one eye, a thrown shard from a split marker stone during a forced reset. Griffin held him while he shook, blood warming her cuff, wrapped his head with torn linen and kept measuring. By return, she had enough to challenge not only a line but a system. Acreage tallies in Oren's warehouse reports did not match taxed parcels by district. Carter's manifests listed grain loads from fields that, on official maps, no longer existed as village land. Numbers gave the lie a shape. She waited for first thaw court in 1026 because witness benches would be full, and reversal in session required live testimony. Tamsin confirmed attendance from bell tower records and counted 19 likely witnesses before sunrise. More than 12, Tamsin said, biting thread to tie her sleeve. If he rules wrong first, he can reverse if we force the clause. Third ledger stays chained by the north lectern. I can get there in 10 strides. Can you read while everyone is shouting? I can read while the roof collapses. The hearing opened with bridge tolls and winter theft. Griffin stood in side queue, survey tubes strapped across her back, oath writ folded in her pocket. Ivar took the dais in black wool with silver at cuff, expression shuddered. Oren stood 3 paces below, immaculate in charcoal coat and pale gloves. When border review came, Oren presented first. He laid out Crown copy with rehearsed sorrow for local confusion, spoke of erosion, emergency adjustment, and efficient redistribution. He did not mention warehouses. Ivar listened, asked 2 technical questions, and issued ruling. Crown map upheld pending seasonal confirmation. Oren bowed. A clerk reached for the stamp. That was when Griffin moved. She did not ask permission. She climbed the rail, landed hard enough to jar her knee, and slammed 1 sealed survey tube onto evidence table so wax shards jumped. Dispute. Immediate dispute under third ledger codicil. Gasps rippled. A guard stepped forward. Sable planted himself and bared teeth. Griffin pulled the second tube free and held up officer seals. Measured firsthand during 1025 snowmelt, cairns 1 through 17, 2 officers of seal, marker casts included. Oren's polished tone sharpened. This interruption is contempt. Contempt is stealing grain by moving stone. Ivar's gaze struck her. Petitioner, you will stand where called. She stepped closer instead, boots leaving meltwater on tile. Call me then. Call the measure. You know reversal is lawful before adjournment. No one breathed for a beat. Tamsin was already moving toward North Lectern. Ivar held out his hand. Bring me the seals. Griffin placed both tubes on dais table herself, close enough to see a nick in Ivar's signet. He broke 1 seal, unrolled, scanned coordinates, marker casts, counter-signatures, then looked at Oren. Were these materials disclosed to Crown Office? Oren spread his hands. Informal drafts, unverified. They bear officer seals. Seals can be persuaded. Tamsin's voice came from lectern, quiet and unavoidable. Codicil 7, page 41. Revision in session permitted upon new sworn measure in presence of 12 witnesses and 2 officers. Witness count 19. Officers' marks visible. The stamp clerk froze. Ivar straightened. The hall tightened around that movement. She is correct. Everything after became procedure, then reckoning. Ivar ordered immediate recount under court supervision. Now, bring both copies, bring chain register, summon the 2 seal officers to testify before this session closes. Oren objected first with polish, then with irritation. This is irregular. So is an 18-mile drift that benefits 1 factor, Ivar replied. Griffin stood at petitioner rail, mud drying on hem, while measurements were read line by line. Cairn coordinates matched her 1025 survey and contradicted Crown copy at 7 critical points. At point 4, offset was nearly 3 miles. At point 11, the rotated marker explained the bend downslope. By point 17, erosion was no longer plausible. The two officers arrived breathless from lower offices and swore to their seals. One held up his ink-stained thumb and identified each wax impression without hesitation. Tamsin counted witnesses present when oath was given, tapping rail with her knuckle. 19 still, 19 hearing. Then Griffin requested warehouse tallies. Oren's mouth tightened. Irrelevant. Relevant to motive, he shifted taxable acreage on paper and over-collected grain from villages no longer credited with those fields. Ivar turned to records clerk. Warehouse manifests for Vale Holdings, current and prior year. A locked chest was brought from records alcove. Clerk produced bound sheets marked with Oren's factor seal. Griffin asked to read the columns herself. Ivar nodded. She spread pages and ran entries aloud: load counts, storage bins, outbound contracts. These totals assume production from acreage no longer taxed to village accounts under altered map. Difference equals 12,000 bushels over 2 cycles. 12,000. A hiss went through benches. 12,000 bushels was winter survival for 5 villages. Oren laughed once, too loud. Speculation from a compulsive measurer. Griffin lifted another page. Your own tally marks. Bin C through G intake exceeds legal acreage yields by district, unless grain grows in stone. Ivar asked for district tax rolls. Numbers were checked against acreage from both maps and transport receipts. Mismatch held every pass. By late afternoon, window light had shifted to brass. Ivar stood and spoke judgment without flourish. Ruling in favor of Vale map is void in this session under Third Ledger Codicil. Borderline reverts to sworn cairn measure pending full ridge verification. Grain tithe over collection identified at 12,000 bushels equivalent across 5 villages. Oren Vale, you are charged with fraud against Crown and Commons. Guards moved in, chains clinking before hands touched Oren's wrists. He did not struggle. He turned to benches as if expecting support. Trade hall men looked down. None stood. As he was led away, Oren spat over his shoulder. You think this ends with me? Ivar answered evenly. No, it begins. Session should have adjourned there, but Griffin stepped forward again, pulse pounding. The Crown's claim oath enabled this. It let offices compel measurers into silence and service instead of hearing disputed lines, narrow it. Murmurs surged. Challenging statute in open court this raw was dangerous. Ivar asked for the writ. The same writ from 1024 was placed on table. Ivar touched his old signature, then read from text he had enforced against her. Any skilled measurer within summit jurisdiction may be compelled. He stopped and looked across room, not at advisors, but at people who would live with the words. Emergency use is hereby defined and narrowed in this court. Only declared famine logistics, flood rerouting, or active landslip response. No oath claim may be used to suppress filed border dispute. Effective now. Tamsin rang the bell once, hard enough to make rafters hum. Griffin's hands shook after the sound stopped. When court finally broke, dusk thickened corridors and oil lamps threw amber pools across the stone. Griffin collected maps with clumsy fingers, shoulder throbbing where tube strap had dug all day. Sable limped beside her, favoring scarred leg. Tamsin caught up near inner stair and pressed bread into Griffin's palm. Eat, or you'll fold. I can't swallow. Then chew and be angry at me. Griffin took one bite because Tamsin stared until she did. Somewhere below, chains rattled as guards moved prisoners toward holding cells. Trade hall won't let this settle, Tamsin said quietly. You hit their stored grain, not just his neck. They can come to hearing. They will. With knives wrapped in etiquette. Ivar sent no page. He came himself, turning into corridor from Western Passage with one guard at distance. Without crown and dais height, he looked less untouchable and more tired than Griffin had seen him. Ink stained his right hand. "Frostborn," he said, then quietly, "Griffin." She waited. "I need original marker cast notes before morning in case Records Vault receives interest. Secure copies tonight." "You think they'll burn evidence?" "I think men who lose 12,000 bushels become inventive." Anger she had carried since 1024 found him with familiar ease. "Inventive enough to hide behind your oath?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." That admission hit harder than denial. He continued, words chosen. "There is a North Archive stack not listed on public plan. Older stone stair. Fewer entrances. I can place 2 guards. Your guards watched me be bound 7 years. And today they watched me unbind the statute in public. I don't ask trust. I ask speed." Sable shifted, nails clicking on stone. Griffin looked down and saw his weight off left hind leg, nose pointed toward a narrow service passage half hidden behind hanging tapestries. She had walked this corridor many times and never noticed the gap. The hound gave a low whine and took 3 uneven steps toward it. Tamsin squinted. "That passage goes nowhere. Or did, before North Wall repair." Sable pawed at a lower panel where plaster had cracked. A draft came through carrying old paper dust. Griffin crouched, pressed hand to panel. Hollow. Ivar nodded. "There, hidden route to North Stacks. Old stair. 43 steps." "How do you know it's 43? "Counted when I was 10 and hiding from tutors." For the first time all day, Griffin almost smiled. They moved quickly. Tamsin to fetch lamp oil and sealing wax. Griffin with maps and cast impressions wrapped in cloth. Ivar with crowbar from maintenance alcove. He pried panel free. Stale air gusted out. Sable squeezed through first, limp and all, tail low, nose working. Griffin counted under her breath as they climbed. At 43, stair opened into cramped archive chamber lined with cedar shelves and dust-furred volumes. A slit window admitted moonlight the color of tin. They worked without ceremony. Tamsin laid papers on a scarred table. Griffin copied key coordinate sheets while Ivar held lamp and melted wax for duplicate seals. Shadows crossed pages and retreated. At one point, their hands reached for the same twine strip. Griffin's fingers brushed inside of Ivar's wrist where pulse beat hard. Both pulled back. No comment. Outside the hidden door, court hushed into night. Past midnight, fatigue peeled off public masks. Tamsin had gone to ring second watch and place 1 trusted civilian in outer corridor, leaving Griffin and Ivar alone among leather and paper dust. Sable lay under table, chin on paws, one eye open. Griffin knelt to lift a crate of marker casts and her knee buckled. Ivar caught her elbow before she hit stone. His hand stayed there 1 heartbeat too long. "Careful," he said. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't sound gentle as if the last 2 years didn't happen." He let go at once. "Fair." She sat on table edge, breathing through a stitch in her side. "I wanted to hate you cleanly. Easier that way." "What stopped you?" "Competence. You notice details nobody else does. You listen when it counts. It's infuriating." A short breath from him that might have been a laugh. "I noticed detail in 1024 and still enforced the oath." "You did." "I told myself order mattered. That one harsh law used consistently was better than a weak court used selectively." "And now?" "Now I know consistency can still be cruelty." The words settled sharp and plain. Griffin looked at his hands, ink in cuticles, small scar over thumb joint, healing blister near ring finger base. Desire moved through her with unwelcome clarity. She stood, closed distance until a handspan remained. "I want you," she said. No ornament, no apology. Ivar did not touch her. His pupils widened. Breath changed. If you say that because today bound us politically, I'm saying it because I've wanted to bite you for months and not always in anger. His mouth twitched. That is indecently specific. Good. He lifted a hand, stopped inches from her cheek, lowered it. I carry power you did not choose. Even now. Even after today. If I move first, I can never be sure. Relief hit her as sharply as frustration. She had braced for hunger to overrun sense. Instead, he drew a line and asked her to stand there with him. Then I move first, she said, placing her palm flat on his chest over the heartbeat she could feel through wool. And you ask each step. His eyes closed briefly. May I hold your wrist? Yes. He wrapped his hand around her wrist gently enough to be refused. She did not refuse. May I kiss you? Ivar asked. Griffin nodded, then corrected. Yes. You may. The kiss was brief and careful, then less careful by mutual failure. Griffin grabbed his coat front. He made a low sound. For a handful of breaths, archive walls and court titles dissolved into mouth and hands and lamp smoke. Then she felt his body tense, not reluctance, restraint. He broke the kiss first, forehead to hers, both breathing hard in cool air. If we continue tonight, he said, voice rough, it happens in a room where you are not under summons, not exhausted, not one floor above records deciding 5 villages. I want no shadow of compulsion over us. She laughed once, shaky. You're refusing me on ethical grounds. I'm postponing, on ethical grounds, and because if I touch your hip again, I will forget my own name. Her smile stayed. Ivar, then. Griffin. They stayed close without advancing, nearness that burned and steadied at once. She slid her hand from his chest to his forearm and squeezed. Chosen, she said. Chosen, he answered. When Tamsin returned with fresh water and 2 hard pears, she took one look at their faces and said nothing. She set pears down, checked copied sheets, and announced practicalities. Outer hall clear. One trade clerk sniffed near West Vault, got redirected by a guard with no humor. Dawn session in 3 hours. If either of you sleeps now, I'm ringing into your ears. Griffin bit pear flesh that tasted like winter and grit. Dawn came gray and brittle. Frost traced inside high windows the season had turned. The same courtroom filled again with witnesses drawn by rumor and necessity. Word had run overnight. Reversed ruling, fraud charge, oath narrowed. People absent yesterday, crowded side aisles now. Tamsin rang opening bell and called witness count. 23 present at start, including 6 who heard yesterday's reversal and can attest continuity. Oren was brought in chains for formal charge confirmation before transfer. He kept spine straight, hair combed, face blank enough to pass for calm until Griffin read summarized fraud figures again. At 12,000 bushels, one jaw muscle jumped. Ivar presided without crown, by custom for corrective sessions. He confirmed voided map status and set immediate restitution mechanism. Seized grain stores first to village emergency bins, then valuation against missing tithes. 5 villages named in petition will receive first release under officer guard. No private sale until quotas met. Oren requested leniency pending trade hall review. Denied, Ivar said. You will have hearing, not delay. When guards turned him toward side exit, Oren stopped and faced room. Trade hall does not break because one factor falls. Griffin stepped to rail. Then let trade hall stand in daylight. Ivar nodded to clerk. Record this order. Asset seizure hearing for associated trade interests is set under first docket of the new lawkeeper. The title hung in air before anyone had said it openly. Murmurs rolled through benches. Tamsin's grin flashed. Ivar rose. Yesterday, this court heard a petitioner the court had previously diminished. Today, that petitioner is invested where her expertise belongs. At law, not beneath it. Bring the staff. A court officer carried forward the lawkeeper's staff. Ash wood darkened by years of handling, capped in hammered iron, carved with boundary knots near the grip. Griffin stared at it as if it might vanish. Ivar called her full name. Griffin Frostborn, step forward. She did. Do you swear to hold Summit law in measurable truth, to hear dispute without rank preference, and to revise when wrong in open witness? I swear. Do you swear to keep boundary measure transparent to commons and crown alike? I swear. He held out the staff. She reached. Their hands met on worn wood. Contact lasted a fraction too long for pure protocol. Then, by authority vested in this court, you are Summit Lawkeeper for year 1026 and term continuing by review. Tamsin struck bell 3 times. On the third, someone in back clapped. Then another. Then many. Sable crossed the floor on determined uneven gait and lowered himself at the base of dais, circling twice before settling with a grunt, scarred leg angled out. Griffin looked down and nearly lost composure. Procedure resumed quickly. Under Griffin's first seated minutes, court entered 3 immediate directives: publication of corrected border coordinates in common postings, emergency grain convoy routes for the 5 villages, and formal summons to Trade Hall Associates of Orin for asset seizure hearing within 7 days. Every directive had number, path, and named enforcement point. Ivar asked whether she wished to add to oath-narrowing terms. She did. Emergency use only means emergency by objective trigger, not convenience. Trigger list is finite. Active famine logistics with district shortfall certified, flood displacement over 10 households, landslip blocking primary road. Any claim oath issue outside those triggers is void. Ivar considered, then nodded. Adopted. Tamsin wrote fast, lips moving as she tracked each witness still present. When session paused for water, Griffin finally sat in the lawkeeper's chair. Smooth wood at the arms held years of other hands. She placed both palms flat and felt old humiliation from 1024 and present authority occupy the same body without canceling each other. By noon, Orin was gone down South Road in chains, flanked by 4 guards, heading for secure holding pending trial. Trade Hall representatives filed out in tight clusters, whispering through their teeth. Court did not collapse. Bells marked quarter hours as always. Griffin stood on outer landing with Tamsin, while workers loaded first grain carts reclaimed from seized stores. Each cart was marked in chalk by district. Wheels creaked. Horses stamped steam. Your handwriting in the minutes is terrible, Tamsin said. So is yours. Mine is artful chaos. Yours looks like a trapped spider. Griffin laughed, brief and real. Thank you for reading the codicil before I could lose nerve. I never doubted your nerve. I doubted everyone else's honesty. A shadow fell beside them. Ivar had removed formal coat, shirt sleeves rolled, forearms smudged with crate dust. Several attendants pretended not to see. Convoys move in 20 minutes, he said. First route takes lower switchback. Less ice. Griffin nodded. I want civilian counters on each cart at delivery. Done. He hesitated. Now every hesitation had witnesses. Tonight, he said quietly, if you choose. Not summons. Invitation. West Terrace room. No guards at door unless called. Her pulse kicked once. I choose. Tamsin made a noise that was absolutely not a cough. I will personally ring any emergency away from that corridor unless Mountain cracks in half. Ivar's mouth tilted. Your civic dedication is noted. They watched first convoy depart. Sable inspected each wheel with stern seriousness, then leaned against Griffin's shin. His limp worsened in cold, eased with rest. The hidden stair route he had found was already being fitted with reinforced inner latch by 2 laborers under Griffin's order. Afternoon brought first petitions to her new docket. A widow disputing mill toll, 2 shepherd brothers arguing lambing meadow rights, a mason requesting floodwall compensation. Griffin heard each with staff across her lap and asked for numbers before rhetoric. Tamsin stayed by Bell and fed witness counts into pauses. At sundown, Ivar returned for final review of emergency orders. They stood at opposite ends of map table while clerks departed one by one. Distance between them was 3 strides and a history. "You changed the oath today," Griffin said, tracing a finger over trigger list she had dictated. "Publicly, that matters. You forced the court to deserve you. That matters more. Flattery from a king is suspicious. Then call it observation from a man who was wrong." She held his gaze. Old resentment was not gone, it had changed texture. When Hall emptied, she stepped around table and laid 2 fingers against his wrist, the place he had asked permission to hold in archive. "I remember what we said." "Chosen," he replied. "Chosen." No kiss then, not with clerks within earshot and work still warm on table. They walked out together into torchlight, shoulders almost touching, and parted at stare with understanding steadier than rush. The West Terrace room had 1 narrow window over dark ridges and 1 brazier clicking as coal settled. No crest on wall, no throne chair, no petition rail. Griffin arrived in plain linen and wool, hair damp at nape from basin rinse, lawkeeper staff left in her chambers by choice. Ivar opened the door himself and stepped back, to let her pass first. They spoke before touching, set boundaries aloud like survey points. "No court language," Griffin said. "No titles," Ivar answered. "Any stop means stop. Any uncertainty means ask." Then he asked, and she answered, and consent stayed spoken in plain words, repeated when needed. Desire no longer had to fight for room to be heard. They laughed once when his belt buckle snagged blanket fringe. They paused twice to ask and answer again. They did not rush toward proof. They let wanting be specific. Her hand on scar near his thumb, his mouth below her ear, her knee over his thigh while coals clicked and wind dragged along outer stones. When they finally lay quiet, Griffin watched breath fog and clear near window slit. Ivar traced inside of her wrist with 1 finger as if memorizing rote. No oath, no decree. 2 bodies that had nearly been shaped by compulsion and refused it at the edge. Much later she rose, wrapped in blanket, and looked down into dark court below where watch lamps marked pathways like anchored stars. Somewhere in lower halls, Tamsin's bell marked 3rd watch, steady and unmistakable. Sable, banned from this room by practical necessity and muddy paws, scratched once at outer threshold and then settled with a resigned huff. Griffin smiled into dark. "He disapproves." "He supervises," Ivar said from bed, relentlessly. By dawn's first color, they had slept in fragments and spoken in long threads. Famine memories, laws written by men who never carried sacks uphill, what shared governance might look like when disagreement stayed disagreement without becoming war. Ivar admitted fear, not of rebellion, but of becoming the ruler who confuses order with virtue. Griffin admitted fear of becoming so sharp in defense she cut allies with enemies. "Keep me honest," he said, "only if you return the favor." "Done." Morning pulled them toward work. She dressed and pinned hair with plain bone comb. He tied cuffs. At the door, he did not kiss her until he asked. She said yes. 7 days later, asset seizure hearing opened under Griffin's first full docket exactly as ordered. Trade hall allies of Orin arrived with advocates, account summaries, and expressions practiced in polished mirrors. Tamsin rang in 27 witnesses. Ivar sat to Griffin's right, not presiding, present by oath and by public trust, being built 1 visible choice at a time. Warehouse ledgers were read, cart routes compared. Shell companies collapsed under simple questions about acreage and yield. 3 associates surrendered property claims rather than face deeper fraud counts. Two contested and lost by sunset when transport receipts contradicted sworn statements. Seized goods were inventoried for redistribution without ceremony. No one could claim surprise at process. It was all in daylight. Outside court, the 5 villages received grain in measured convoys over the next fortnight. Children carried small sacks home in pairs. Bakers restarted ovens in 2 districts that had gone cold. A mill wheel that had stood still in late winter turned again under repaired sluice gates. Griffin visited one drop point and watched a woman count bushels twice before laughing into her apron. Sable's limp improved with rest and salve, worsened in rain, improved again. He refused to stay out of court no matter how many attendants coaxed him elsewhere. Griffin eventually authorized an old rug at side of dais as working hound accommodation, to Tamsin's delight and clerkly confusion. The narrowed claim oath was tested once within a month when a district officer tried to invoke it for routine road survey. Griffin struck the order as invalid under the new trigger list before noon. Ivar backed the strike publicly. The message traveled fast. By late spring, resentment that once defined every exchange between Griffin and Ivar had become something less dramatic and more durable. Accountability with heat in it, argument without annihilation, desire that survived daylight. On a clear evening after long hearings, Griffin returned to Summit Court Hall alone for a final walk before lockup. She ran her hand along the petitioner rail she had once climbed in fury. The wood held a tiny dent from that day, invisible unless you knew where to touch. She stood at the angle where she had heard she is correct and let the memory settle. Tamsin appeared at Bell Rope with 2 mugs of thin ale and offered one without speaking. They drank in companionable quiet while sunset painted high windows copper. "Do you ever get used to being watched?" Griffin asked. Tamsin considered. "No. You get used to deciding anyway." From side door came boots and key jingle as night staff began rounds. Ivar entered carrying a folded cloak, expression softening when he saw them. No crown, no performance. He crossed the floor and set the cloak around Griffin's shoulders because mountain night still bit. Sable trotted in behind him and, with the grave authority of an elder magistrate, made a slow circle at the foot of the dais before folding onto the rug. One eye on the door, scarred leg tucked close. The bell did not ring again that night.